So I have submitted to the Electoral Commission a complaint against WWF, that's the World Wildlife Fund, for their climate debate tonight, where they have intentionally or deliberately excluded me from the debate as a party leader and as a registered MP on the North Shore for the election, or registered as candidate, of course, just preempting the result in a very lovely way. And the reason I've submitted them to the Electoral Commission is because I believe that they are perpetrating or promoting the fraud of the ETS or of the Paris Agreement, which starts with that whole sort of intent to persuade New Zealanders that we need to restructure our entire economy on a measure of carbon, which is actually the basis of an international tax. So when people say, when the Labour Party terrify you, as they rightly should, by saying that they are going to introduce or restructure our entire economy on the basis of carbon within 1 year, if they were so wrongly to get into power. Basically what they mean is that they're restructuring our entire economy to be based around an international tax. Okay, it's very, very dangerous. Now, I am all for defending the environment. I've dedicated my life to it for the last 10 years. And what I've noticed while doing that is WWF's position is very unique. So let me tell you a few stories. To my shock, I was at a few WWF parties in Monaco, fundraising parties, where they, sell a few fluffy beers for $1,000 a pop and let a few billionaires eat cake. Well, one of those people eating cake, with great irony, was Gina Reinhardt at one of the WWF parties. Now let's put that in context with Australia, okay, where I have the Victory Australia case. You can look online at victoryaustralasia.com. It's a bit of a mouthful to spell, but victoryaustralasia.com, or go through my website sustainablequalitypurpose.com to get to the Australian case. In defence of the Great Barrier Reef, okay, this is the only international legal case that exists currently, with all the national cases having failed, that has the capability to criminalise industrialists who are developing the mines in Australia that will bring about the death or great harm and destruction of one of the 7 natural wonders of the world, which is the Great Barrier Reef. Now, the legal argument I uniquely identified possible within the Rome Statute provides us with the only international law capable of criminalising the industrialists for their crime of contamination and not charging you, the taxpayers, an ETS tax to pay for the industrialist bill, as they continue to destroy with unlimited number of industrial developments at great profit, and given all their tax breaks, probably no tax, while the taxpayers foot the tax bill, the cost of the destruction continuing, okay? And this is based around and connected with the carbon economy, and that's what WWF promote: carbon economy, not carbon monoxide spewing out the end of your exhaust fuel pipes. It's carbon dioxide, that gas that you breathe out every day, the gas that the oceans breathe in every day to, produce plankton and then generate most of the world's oxygen, and the gas that the rainforests and all the plants and everything alive breathes in, other than humans. We breathe it out, they breathe it in, and everything, the life cycle continues. It is the most magical self-compensating gas that exists in the planet. Now, the Paris Agreement conveniently forgets and carbon monoxide, for the same reason that they do not hold the industrialists criminally or financially liable for the crime of contamination, okay? It's about making sure that the carbon monoxide is directly related to the industrialists' extraction of fossil fuels and the use of the fossil fuels in the car combusting to pollute our air. So it's left out of the Paris Agreement, okay? What we have to understand is effectively what the Paris Agreement does, and the ETS tax does, and the carbon economy concept does, that WWF will only promote, is it shifts complete responsibility away from the industrialists for financial and criminal responsibility, so that they can continue their crime of contamination with no liability whatsoever, with no restriction whatsoever. Okay, the Paris Agreement and the carbon economy does not do anything to legally or otherwise restrict their developments, which is why National happily sign up the Paris Agreement, and Labour support it too, so big parties don't vote for them, but why they both sign up to the Paris Agreement and then get out there and promote natural gas, aka fracking, which is highly contaminating to everyone in close proximity. Okay, because the industrialists, or the Paris Agreement, does not identify the fact that It is the contamination at the point of extraction of these fossil fuels, and the extraction itself, which is possibly imbalancing the temperature more than anything, because fossil fuels are, by their very nature, natural fuels in the ground. They grow our food. The carbon cleans our water, it cleans our drinking water. We actually need it in the ground to sustain a clean fresh water supply. And it also is the fuel capable of retaining the temperature balance in the earth by staying in the earth. Okay, it's called buried sunshine. It's my evolution after all of my legal arguments that I've made in defense of the environment. My evolution is back to the point where those fuels, nature knows best, those fuels are supposed to stay in the ground as energy for the living organism that provides life to all of us on earth and sustains life for all future generations. But back to my point about WWF, okay? I've laid this complaint because I believe that they are presenting a debate to New Zealanders that says we're neutrally presenting the New Zealand political landscape against climate change, but they are only including the parties who are supportive of a carbon economy and ETS. Now, you know, I mean, New Zealand First is supportive. They say on their website. Secretly, I don't think they are. But you know, I mean, the fact is that they still publish that even though they would be the last party in the world to implement the carbon tax, that they will implement it if the world will. Well, the Logic Party, that's me, says absolutely not. The ETS tax is a way to effectively, if you structure your entire economy around an international tax, you are effectively globalizing the fundamental basis and core of your economy so that an international tax can then dictate your sovereign taxes, your allocation of them, because if we're already transferring, we're only spending what, 84 billion a year, and we're already committed to transferring 14 billion of that out in the next 10 years. Okay, it's only about 2 billion a year, but it's still a beginning. That's the key. It's a beginning. This tax, and I say it's a tax agreement. Someone will say it's just carbon trading, but they use your taxes to do the carbon trading that they've signed up to do with this agreement, okay? So WWF are refusing to include the Logic Party and me as a registered MP on the North Shore, and I'm the party who has 7 legal arguments that criminalises industrialists for the crime of contamination so that the taxpayers are not not footing the bill, okay? And I mean, as I said in my debate last night, it's also important to make a distinction between the fertiliser companies, just like the fuel companies selling the consumer dirty fuels that pollute, but the fuel companies are the ones massively profiting off those dirty fuels. In the same way for the farmers, it's the fertiliser companies selling the dirty toxic fertilisers like the nitrates or nitrogens that should not be used or would not be used in a regenerative farming system. I laughed last night as well as Maggie Barry saying, you know, we've got to get rid of all the weeds, whereas if she knew anything about regenerative farming, some of the most world-leading processes are around actually realising that weeds themselves have a function to play in regenerating the health of the soil. And if you let the weeds grow 6 months, 12 months later, when the soil is naturally rejuvenated and you're sort of land banking water so that the soil is naturally rehydrated, then that system together works to make the land work without need of artificial fertilizers, especially not chemical fertilizers. So, I mean, it's so funny to be in a debate and just, you know, just understand that our existing governance groups and our MPs for those governance groups have fundamental misunderstanding of the economy, a fundamental misunderstanding of nature, a fundamental misunderstanding of protecting the environment, because they think that charging a tax is going to resolve environmental destruction, when clearly the document itself does not prohibit the environmental destruction from continuing at great profit for the industrialists while charging the taxpayers the bill. Okay, this is really important. So what I'm saying about WWF is that, you know, I mean, let's go back to the Gina Rinehart situation. Gina Rinehart's sitting there eating cake at the WWF party in Monaco. I mean, okay, so WWF have raised, I don't know, millions of dollars in Australia. I mean, between the big NGOs, about 50 million last year. Okay, now they've raised that on the story of defending the Great Barrier Reef. However, there are 3 organisations who were doing legal arguments to defend the Great Barrier Reef. And let's face it, when the government is condoning the billionaire developments to create these mines that will threaten the life of the reef, you can't go and talk sweetly to the government. They are intent to drive these deals through. So the only way to stop government and billionaire industrialists is law. the courts, okay, so the Environmental Defenders Office, the Great Barrier Reef Tourism Board, and SQP, my agency, Sustainable Quality Purpose, all had legal arguments on climate change, defending the reef against dredging, defending water quality in the local area of the mine, etc. Okay, these legal arguments, if they worked on a national level, the dredging was stopped. The tourism board stopped it. But I spoke to the tourism board, and they said they were furious at organisations like WWF, who have, you know, Gina Reinhart eating cake, while Gina Reinhart is doing one of the mines, the Alpha mine, that will hurt the Great Barrier Reef. And yet WWF is sitting there telling the story to protect the Great Barrier Reef, feeding Gina cake while she's destroying the Great Barrier Reef, and then spreading the story that the Great Barrier Reef is dying and dead, so that the people, the tourism board, who are actually paying to protect the Great Barrier Reef genuinely, are suffering financially because WWF are preempting the kill of their business by saying the reef's dead, you know, don't go there. Yet they're paying the money to protect the reef so that people can still go there and enjoy a living reef. WWF are taking all the public money out of the system to tell the story of protecting it and doing absolutely nothing to protect it. The Environmental Defenders Office cases, they are more likely to have the result of requiring the industrialists go back and redo their environmental protection plan. Okay, so, you know, it has a result of perhaps giving more protection to the reef, but usually the government can then re-legislate, or they can help the industrialists put through a new environmental plan that passes through the court's approval, and eventually it slows the process down, but it goes ahead. Now, my legal argument gives a chance through the ICC, and we're working on a new submission. And this is something we have to fight for, and this is why I'm advocating developing an ICC for sustainability here on the North Shore, with the support of world-leading criminal barrister Michael Mansfield, QC, who's the man who prosecuted the ecocide, the mock trial of ecocide in Britain originally, on the basis of you know, proposing new law for the Rome Statute of the ICC. But in fact, the law already exists to defend the environment in the Rome Statute already, but we need to fight for it. Okay, so the point is we are working on a new submission to the court on this case. I first opened this case in 2015. I submitted it to the court and the Queen, and within a week, within about 4 days, I received an answer from the Queen's representative thanking me for the case. I had proposed that she was legally required to use her reserve powers to remove Tony Abbott from power at the time for his corruption and around this issue of coal mining and gas fracking and contamination. And within 3 days later, I got that reply on the Friday from the Queen, and on Monday, Tony Abbott was removed from power. Malcolm Turnbull was announced as the new Prime Minister, and 1 hour later, a week after I'd submitted the argument to the court and the Queen, the court itself, the International Criminal Court, accepted my argument for review. That review process has continued through multiple submissions, and now we're working on a new one that really heavily argues their right to assume jurisdiction over this case. But importantly anyway, is now what I'm working on is an International Criminal Court extension for sustainability focused cases, so that this law, which can prosecute the industrialists who are responsible for contaminating, and that's whether it's fertilizer companies who are selling the contaminants that the farmers are, the farmers are run by their banks, most of them. I mean, the banks want to support high input systems with lots of nitrogen being sprayed on to guarantee production, and that's what they'll bank. So what you find is that often the farmers have no choice but to run those highly toxic chemical systems in order to appease their banks, who, you know, just pretty much let them keep their name on the title of the farm, but effectively own it, and increasingly put the farmers in more and more debt, which is why they can't afford ETS taxes, fart taxes, water taxes, capital gains taxes that everyone so much wants to give them, because people are misunderstanding the fact of how much they have a noose around their neck already by the structure of sitting in between these banks, which charge them too much interest, and basically invent the money to give them their loans out of thin air for the profit of international bankers, while our farmers who work hard to sustain our food supply, which is a very difficult job, are punished constantly and live in a permanent state of poverty and austerity, not by choice, and not so they can sell their farms for millions in the future like Top seems to promote, but because they're generational farmers and they've got absolutely no choice. They love to farm, but they're put in a situation where it's incredibly difficult. In fact, under the Logic policy, we support price supports for farmers. Farmers shouldn't drop below $6 a kg of milk solids for payouts, ever, you know, because they're running a food system that can't afford for that to drop. Otherwise, they start losing equity on their farm. They can't afford to pay their interest bill. They can't afford to pay enough staff, so they work too hard and they're depressed and exhausted. They can't afford to pay their power bill and their phone bill. So I mean, I know farmers who have a shower and then turn off the hot water tank. Who does that in the city? They can't afford, they have internet allocation where they can't afford to watch YouTube videos because it uses up their internet, and they can't afford to buy any more internet, which they need to check their emails to receive their bills so they can, you know, stay on the farms. I mean, it's crazy, the situation that especially young farmers are under. So I advocate price supports and completely protecting New Zealand farm ownership, but absolutely no new taxes for farmers. And then back to the same thing. So it's the fertiliser companies who are enormously profiting of selling the chemical industrial fuels that effectively poison our food supply. And it's the fossil fuel companies, the industrialists, who are incredibly profiting of selling the fuels which pollute our air and water and soils and ocean, and especially at the point of extraction. We focus so much on consumption, but it's the point of extraction that fundamentally a lot of the contamination happens at that point, and the Paris Agreement does nothing to stop it. The carbon economy is a beautiful dream. It's based on future promises by governments, and you know, scarily Labour, TOP and the Greens would actually implement it and then restructure our entire economy based on an international tax for future global control. And that is not conspiracy, that is absolutely happening. In fact, if we want to protect our sovereignty, we have the alternative of using my legal argument. And my legal argument states that the industrialists are criminally liable for contaminating our ecosystem, for the pollution, you know, for the economic structure that means we overconsume. Honestly, they are the ones who are not only responsible, but they are also financially benefiting from putting us into, or keeping us in, this old model system. Okay, so, you know, what I advocate is a vision, and I'm starting as MP on the North Shore, but what I advocate is a vision for the North Shore to lead the world in complete self-sufficient, local, sustainable energy and industry, and even to the point where we were manufacturing the latest and new solar and kinetic energy and dual battery cars, you know, or hydrogen fuel cell cars that use water to fuel the hydrogen. So energy sources that have absolutely zero impact on the environment, zero. No, you know, silicon mining and photovoltaic panels for solar, that's highly toxic. You know, how come we have this cognitive dissonance where just because it's being mined in China perhaps and killing a lot of people who live in China and are doing the mining for us, we don't mind because there's we've sort of been taught that there's no obvious effect, but solar, silicon, photovoltaic panels are bad. So many of the clean energy registered forms of energy source are actually still very bad for the environment, but we're not told the full story clearly. So another thing that I advocate in my policies is making it reanalyzing what should be called clean energy, because we have all of these new clean energy technologies which are capable of completely ending the environmental harm and supplying all of our energy needs on a local decentralized basis, which also means that the local residents are empowered to own their energy source, to optimize their energy source, to innovate and interact with it in terms of all of our waste turning back into different forms of energy, for example, and a complete life cycle completion where everything that we use turns back into something of value, whether that be electricity or a product that is recycled. So to understand this more, I'm advocating a development I've worked on for a long time, which is called Energy Eminence and Waste Complete, and you can check this online at energyeminence.com and wastecomplete.com, where you can see how within a very unique market structure of mini power towers on each street or in each area, we can utilise these new small-scale technologies that completely innovate to eliminate environmental harm and allow us to move into this new sustainable economy that is completely possible if we end the environmental destruction, if we use the technology that allows us to sustainably transition within 9 years, if we set up an international criminal court for sustainability on the North Shore so that we can lead the movement of preventative justice that is possible under existing law now. And I need to confirm, I have an international criminal court legal argument under review by the ICC currently that criminalises the industrialists. So that's under review by the world's highest court, and it's supported by British QC Michael Mansfield, who is a world leader in this area as a criminal barrister. So this is again, like, this work is way out ahead of the ETS and the carbon agreement, and it's so much of a superior option for the population than going with the Paris Agreement and the carbon economy. And this is why it's shockingly obvious that WWF are probably most likely funded by industrialists in order to mislead the public, to allow their taxes to be used to fund the cost of the destruction, so that the industrialists can continue the destruction at great profit with no limit by just misaligning the story so that people get confused and don't understand, and they think when they want protected environment that they should be reducing carbon dioxide, which is the breath, your breath and the gas of everything alive, and completely miss the point that agreement and the carbon economy does not, through this agreement, legally enforce the protection of the environment. It's just such a major disconnect, and I believe an enormous fraud on the public. If we prosecute, using this law, the environmental destruction in every area of our society, is over. It ends. You can't profit from it anymore. All money related to that destruction since 2002 can be seized by the court and reallocated for use to afford our sustainable transition. All the industrialists who can be proven to have, deliberately, willfully aware of the destruction and the harm to our health that their profiteering or extraction of resource will inflict, that they have still done that and advanced that business model at profit, knowing that we would be physically destroyed in whole or in part as a population. And they can be held criminally liable for up to 30 years to life imprisonment for that crime. And taxpayers do not need to pay a cent. Okay, it's so important that New Zealanders, and this is part of why I started the Logic Party, I want New Zealanders to understand that we are facing a major fraud with the ETS and the Paris Agreement. And like Trump, we should pull out. Now, never thought I would advocate Trump, because obviously I very much disagree with him on willfully inciting the certain areas of conflict in Syria, which obviously they sort of seem to be pulling out of now, but, let's see it ended before we judge. And now willfully inciting conflict in Korea in order to sell billions in arms. And I have a legal argument that interprets the Rome Statute to state to evidence that this willfully kind of propaganda mechanism of inciting illegal conflict is a crime under the law, and you can preempt the genocide that will occur subsequent to it, and hold the individuals accountable. And I would like to see the International Criminal Court summons Nikki Haley and Trump to the court to have a little chat about their using the presidency and the United Nations Security Council platform to promote these illegal wars that profit them in the billions. Okay, it sends their defense company stocks through the roof. They are selling billions in arms deals, and it's all at the cost of absolutely terrifying the entire nation of citizens in North Korea, that they're going to have atomic bombs dropped on their head or be massacred like the population have endured in Syria. Okay, so that's against the law, but I digress. The point is, coming back to the Paris Agreement, is New Zealand should withdraw from the Paris Agreement. We should demonstrate through mechanisms like my clean energy transition model and like the International Criminal Court for Sustainability that can prosecute the industrialists. And we only need a couple of prosecutions to force all the other investors and decision makers to change what they're doing, to change their habits, and to only invest in sustainable options at much lower profits, of course, but unless they like to go to jail, that is their only remaining option. So, okay, we have an alternative, New Zealand. We do not need to let this ETS tax go through. Please do not be stupid enough to vote for Labour. It's a terrible, terrible vote, not only for this reason, but also because Extra taxes constrict monetary supply. They remove your disposable income. You're no longer empowered to allocate money to solve your own problems and live your own life, and it does affect the poor as much as the wealthy. And if you take more money off the wealthy, they don't invest in the economy as much to grow it. Fundamentally, we should have the lowest tax possible. As I said last night in the debate, we should lower income tax to 2% tomorrow. Tomorrow, everyone has disposable incomes, they go out spending, the economy starts working. It's as simple as that. And we should double or quadruple or spend 10 times the public budget to achieve everything that we need. Now, so much of my time has evaporated. It's been so much fun doing this campaign. But I am still going to have published on the website, at least before voting day or final voting day, the full set of policies for transitioning the North Shore, and taking my logic policies, so you can read that at logic.org.nz, and bringing that over into North Shore, like how we can demonstrate the North Shore to lead the world in this sustainable economic transition and be the envy of the world, with a prosperous economy that runs on low tax and high government spending, and definitely no ETS or Paris, because we're quite capable of transitioning ourselves without paying billions of dollars of our taxes offshore for absolutely nothing in direct return. If we want to sponsor a country to transition, that's totally different. But ETS trading, carbon trading, is just a mind-blowingly intellectually deficient solution to the fact that they're not actually stopping the industrial contamination at the source, as we should. Okay, that's today's little note. I owe you a few new currency videos, and please do go on the logic.org.nz website, because there's updates going on there all the time about with more and more depth on the New Zealand economy, pertaining to a new currency in the North Shore that will show New Zealand what our future looks like, because it is the future. Okay, have a good day. See you later.